family, new subscribers to the channel, welcome to another episode. Is it worth it? Question mark. Did I do that right? Did I write it backwards? Whatever. Where I review books across all genres and I let you know which are worth your time. Really excited to kick off today's video with my first read of 2021. I think I might have read this book the fastest I've read a novel in like 5 years, something like that. It only took me 4 days to get through. I know there's some of you out there who are thinking that is way too long to complete a novel, and if that was the shortest I've ever read one, how long is the longest? I'll let you know right now, I'm still reading some books that I started back in like October. I'm a very slow reader. I like paying attention to detail. I like reading sentences line by line. I don't like rushing through. I like what I like, and I hope it's good enough for you guys. Today I want to talk about one of the most anticipated novels of 2020. Came out toward the end of last year, so it's extremely relevant. That is Rumaan Alam's Leave the World Behind. Leave the World Behind is a literary fiction novel centered around a family taking a vacation to just sort of get away from the world when everything gets interrupted by the family who actually owns the Airbnb, claiming there has been some sort of catastrophic event all the way down the East Coast that is knocking out power, cell lines, and they just have to trust these people. But can they trust these people? What do they want? What could they want if they're not being true? There's a lot of interesting conflicts in this story that are presented in ways that you might not expect, especially not with the writing styles of thriller novels nowadays. But being a story in the literary fiction genre with thriller elements, it makes for a really suspenseful tale. One thing I noticed in this book, and maybe this is the case with all literary stories, I haven't read one in a little while, is how quickly the characters are developed. I'm not kidding when I say I knew who the main cast was in and out in the first 15 pages of the story. Maybe the author could do this because the story is told from an omniscient perspective. More on that later. But yeah, I got a really good sense of who these people were very early on in the novel. And then nothing really happens for at least a few pages. I don't want to tell you how much because then something happens, and you will know exactly what it is if you decide to read the story, that changes everything. The best way I can describe it is it was like stepping on a moving treadmill, a spinning treadmill at the highest speed after not doing anything at all, 0 to 100, and the book doesn't relent. Crazy. We go from this quick introduction to a lull in the action to absolutely breakneck speed. It's a hell of a way to tell a story. It's daring in a lot of different ways. One of the ways I would call this book daring is in that there is a portrait of racism here that sort of serves as the underlying conflict, at least from an internal perspective. And we get this sort of perceived perception from a black person's viewpoint. The thoughts of our white protagonists here are very much in line with some of the major issues segregating our country today. Alam visits a lot of the barriers that are separating so many different populations of the country. The thoughts versus the actions versus simply the spoken words of our main characters make for a really interesting dynamic that is also incredibly intuitive and really sets up some nice, perplexing internal conflict. Some of these thoughts are disturbing. Speaking of disturbing, I gotta mention that there's a lot of disturbing imagery here. I don't think I really anticipated that when I first got into this story. I mean, I knew it was a thriller, and I know thrillers have some disturbing images, but this isn't disturbing in a very visceral sense. Rather, it's, how do you describe this? It's more, there's a sense of foreboding here, but there's also some scenes that I can still visualize despite the lack of imagery. He lays it out so simply, Alam does. He puts us in these situations without escalating the stakes. But I don't know, everything is presented so nonchalantly. It's pretty crazy. I think part of this also stems from Alam's understanding of the human condition. Whether it's from personal experience or research, I mean, he gets the way that old people, young people, white people, black people, men, women, all of these different types and variants of the population may react in a crisis situation. He understands the power of thought, anxiety, fear, the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of safety. I don't know if they're interchangeable adjectives in this situation. I'm guessing that they are, given what a person may experience in a potential crisis or pandemic like we're going through right now. Makes it even more timely. Really, his understanding of all of this is a gift, and it's on full display throughout the entire duration of the novel. I also want to touch on the ending. It's as perfect as it could be given what he provides us throughout the narrative. I'm not calling it perfect, and I'm telling you right now, if you're somebody who likes everything wrapped up in a bow with all the answers, you'll hate it. But if you're cool with open endings that give us a solid closure, you're gonna love this ending. It keeps the door cracked and doesn't answer all of your questions, but when you consider the scope of the information you're given throughout the story, there's no way you could get the answer to all your questions, and really, it's not even about that. For me, it was definitely satisfying. But the story is not perfect. One of the reasons for this is, in my opinion, because it's told from an omniscient perspective. Third person omniscient is a old school style of writing that you'll see in a lot of classics, and everything has sort of transitioned in the new age to first person or third person limited, where we get a look inside people's heads. Omniscient storytelling gives authors a different advantage when telling a story. You can approach storytelling with the complete and utter truth, something that we typically don't like to do in first person given the power of an unreliable narrator. We're also able to add interludes showing what might be happening outside of our main circle's cast. And sometimes we can even give glimpses of the future because the omniscient narrator is supposed to be all-knowing. These little perks play to Elam's strengths and advantage as the story goes on. In fact, I don't think the story could have been told from another perspective. It's just not necessarily my cup of tea. I've never been a big fan of omniscient storytelling, of omniscient novels. Maybe it's one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings series. Wow, I'm gonna catch some heat for that one. But anyway, the whole story does come full circle in the end because he's able to tell it from an omniscient perspective, and for that I do applaud him. I'm not sure if that was really a pro or con, but there are some cons in the story. For one, the writing style. Very fragmented. You see this a lot in literary fiction. We're kind of doing this like mind speak type thing where we're getting into the viewer's mind without actually being in their mind. The problem with this is that we are thrown around a lot. This is also kind of coupled with the omniscient storytelling. We're never really grounded. We're constantly going back and forth between viewpoints, and when the writing style is fragmented with that, we're just basically trying to keep up. It's a unique style. It's probably his favorite style, and it does work for him if you like that kind of thing. Again, it's just not for me. Also, speaking of writing style, this is a really wordy book. I don't mean that in the sense of prose and making a sentence that could be 5 words long, 15 for the sake of adding metaphors and whatnot. I'm talking about just unnecessary sentences here, especially in that lull I sort of mentioned between getting to know who our characters are and the big bang in the middle of the story that kind of sets the rest of the book into motion. There's just a lot of stuff that could have been taken out, I thought, that wasn't necessary. Maybe not in terms of plot, but just within the paragraphs. There's descriptions that are 4 sentences long that could have been 1 sentence long. Overall, it's just kind of dense, a little bit too dense. I'm all for dense writing. Most of the books I read are over 500 pages, if not verging on 1,000, but not when it's unnecessary. And at 250-ish pages here, we could have cut 20 or 30 total pages and made this an incredibly succinct and purposeful read. We also have to take note of the main conflict here, something I touched on a little bit earlier, and that is race as an internal conflict and in some ways a motivator here. I really applaud Elam's take on racism and how he's able to sort of bring to light some of the issues our country is facing and put them into a perspective that we may one day be faced with in the light of a crisis. My issue with it was that it seemed to sort of drop off as a main conflict about halfway through the story. We spend the beginning of this novel clearly identifying with race as the main source of internal conflict here. And then once other stuff starts to happen, we just kind of forget about it. And I don't think that that's how the world works. If race is an issue in your life, when something else happens, I don't think it goes away. I guess my point is that I would have rather Alam dive into this thing head first and really attack it for the duration of the story, rather than hit it in the beginning and just forget about it later. Tiptoeing around the point may actually be a more realistic way of approaching this, and maybe that was his objective here. But from a story and a theme perspective, I think that the point could have been driven home a little bit harder. Then again, maybe not. Maybe that was the point that he was trying to make, that we don't give race and the issues surrounding it its just due. This really is a thinking novel. Like I said, it's a literary fiction. I mean, that's what you get when you pick up a literary novel. You get stories that make you think afterwards. And I will be thinking about Leave the World Behind for a long time. It kind of leads me right into whether or not it's worth it. And I think it really is if you enjoy thinking about a story. If you want to read a literary novel with a thriller twist that has some end of the world vibes, this is going to be for you. It's short. It's really, really relevant. It's disturbing. And like I've said, it's a thinker. You're going to get a lot out of this novel if you pick it up and give it a chance. I can definitely see why it's one of the most recommended stories from 2020. I can also see why some of the polarizing reviews have been negative on it. It's not going to be for everybody. But then again, what novel really is? Thanks again for tuning in to today's Is It Worth It? Really excited to get into this new year with you guys. Gonna be putting out some content related to other new reads as the month goes on. Also gonna be branching off and doing some stuff with the Is It Worth It series that might not necessarily be focused on one novel, maybe some series, maybe some book to television comparisons, maybe some ranking systems, who knows? The sky's the limit. Really excited for you guys to be on this journey with me, and hope you'll tune in next time. Thanks a lot.